Unexploded ordnance. No, that's not a typo. It's a fancy term for an artillery shell that doesn't go off, or it's a leftover war grenade that you might dig up somewhere else. And well, when the Claremont Fire sparked and grew inside of the boundaries of Boise's military reserve, firefighters had to deal with exactly that, an unexploded ordnance. Well, we received a comment critical of the military leaving behind that artillery. Dan writes, so the military reserve thing, say more. How does the military get to leave behind stuff that inhibits fire suppression in a residential area? Or who is the governmental body that allows residential areas that the military made unprotectable? Somebody did something unconscionable here. That's a very good question about who would allow a neighborhood to go right next to that. Well, between the 1950s and the 90s, hundreds of homes were built near the former training areas. And at the time, there was no comprehensive investigations on these unexploded ordnances. And much of the military's historical firing data was incomplete or it was scattered. By the late 1990s, firefighters discovered unexploded artillery shells from the 1997 Foothills Fire, which led to more serious investigations. Military land clearance standards from decades ago were much lower than they were today. And as we know, developers rely on historical records and preliminary risk assessments when building. So it has a complicated past. And it wasn't a neighborhood first. Boise built around it without realizing. That's also why today the Army Corps of Engineers continues to investigate it and clean up those remnants. And when these fires do pop up in these kinds of areas, the danger of fighting fire without knowing what's under your feet changes how they do their job, as Cooper Morgan explains.
It's an immediate impact.
Dozers. We can't use dozers in those areas.
As the Claremont Fire burns, the dangers above ground are clear and can be attacked. But under their feet, another kind of danger.
Artillery shells, mortars, things of that nature.
The military reserve was an active training range for the Army in the early 1900s. And the byproduct?
Unexploded ordnance is ordnance that was shot off either through military training or through other types of training, but it hasn't exploded as intended.
Assistant Fire Chief Brad Bolin was there 30 years ago when crews found enough unexploded shells and they decided to formally designate the area as a UXO zone.
Those shells are there. They seem to be finding a few each day, and we have some very, very strong concerns for the safety.
And this really came to light in 1996 after the Foothills Fire and during the mitigation efforts and the rehabilitation efforts of the fire scar.
What people saw as a simple hillside then turned into a landscape of hidden hazards.
I know that our folks found an inert round just the other day that was in pristine condition.
And in 1999, the Army Corps of Engineers and Earth Tech scientists worked at digging them up. But they can't be sure they found them all.
If it was hazardous when it was fired, it's hazardous now. And the folks should stay away from them. If they see anything that they recognize that could be ordnance, they should just stay away from it.
And so the way Boise Fire, the Bureau of Land Management, and other entities navigate the land has changed.
Any type of ground disturbance could potentially explode something that was not detected before.
Instead of pushing dirt with heavy equipment, crews rely on hose lays, backfires, and retardant. In some sections, they don't send firefighters in at all.
How are we going to identify before we get into a situation where we have a critical need for a dozer or something else?
To get ahead of fires here, Boise Fire even contracted a robotic mower this year. The Firebot cuts grass and creates fire breaks around the reserve. Crews then went back in with weed whackers to widen those lines. It's a constant balance. Protect homes without walking firefighters into a minefield of old munitions. Bolin says the priority is clear: to keep his crews safe.
The safety of our personnel is number one on the minds of the fire chief and the chief officers, without a doubt. However, we will risk a lot to save a lot.
So Boise Fire knows the dangers for its firefighters, but for those of you at home, the trails are safe. The Army Corps of Engineers has thoroughly tested the trails and a buffer zone around the trails for these unexploded ordnances. And okay, while Kevin and I were out there, you guys did hear a small boom, right?
That was my big question for you today was, Kevin and I were out there. We heard, I'll say a small boom. We don't know what it was. We don't know if it was propane. So did he mention anything about an unexploded object actually going off?
No, he actually didn't. He said that it was not something that he heard, and he would have known about it if there was something that happened there.
Okay, so he would be the guy to know. I will trust him on that too. It sounds like they're doing more work as well as we speak, so maybe people don't panic when you see flames today, right?
Yeah, Hunter, that's right. Today, they're actually going to be doing some prescribed controlled burns to actually prevent them from getting out of a situation where there is an active fire in those unexploded ordnance zones, so that they can deal with something that's manageable, not something that's super wild. Put firefighters at risk, really. So
Yeah, and when you have good weather conditions for it, you might as well lean into that as well.
exactly.
All right, Cooper, thank you.